The wagon wheel hit another rock, and Rebecca felt her bones rattle for what seemed like the 1,000th time that day. August heat pressed down on the Kansas prairie like a heavy blanket you couldn't throw off. Her husband Daniel sat beside her, guiding their 2 horses forward. Behind them, somewhere far away now, was the life they'd left in Ohio. Ahead was supposed to be California, a new beginning, land of their own. That was the dream. Anyway, Daniel had been so sure about this journey. He'd studied maps for months, talked to other families who'd made the trip. They'd joined up with 2 other wagons, the Henderson brothers, who promised they knew the trail well. For 3 months, things had gone mostly fine. Sure, it was hard. Sure, Rebecca missed her mother terribly. But they were together, and their baby daughter Lucy was healthy despite the rough travel. Then everything changed in a single moment. It happened so fast that Rebecca's mind couldn't quite accept it, even as she watched. Daniel stood up to get a better look at something ahead. The wagon hit a deeper hole than usual. He lost his balance, fell backward, and his head struck the iron rail with a sickening crack before his body tumbled to the ground. Rebecca screamed and pulled the horses to a stop. She jumped down, her long skirt catching on the wheel, nearly falling herself. Daniel lay motionless on the hard earth, his neck bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. She dropped to her knees beside him, calling his name over and over, shaking his shoulders. But she already knew. She'd seen death before, back on her father's farm. She knew the absolute stillness that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. The Henderson brothers came running. They checked Daniel, looked at each other with grim faces, and one of them took off his hat. "Ma'am," the older one said quietly, "I'm real sorry." They buried Daniel right there on the prairie under a sky so blue it seemed cruel. Rebecca stood holding baby Lucy, who was only 8 months old, watching dirt cover the wooden cross they'd hammered together. She felt numb, like she was watching someone else's tragedy from far away. That night, sitting by the fire, the Henderson brothers talked in low voices. Rebecca heard enough to understand. They were scared. Winter was coming in a few months. They'd heard stories about Cheyenne war parties in the area. With Daniel gone, they saw her and Lucy as a burden, extra mouths to feed with no man to help hunt or defend the wagons. "We could take you back to the last fort," the younger brother said the next morning. "It's about 12 days behind us," but Rebecca shook her head. Going back meant admitting defeat, meant giving up on everything she and Daniel had dreamed about. "I'll manage," she said. "I can handle the wagon." The brothers exchanged looks. That night they talked again, their voices carrying in the quiet darkness. Rebecca heard the word liability and can't risk it. She knew what was coming before they told her. They left at dawn 2 days later. The older brother had the decency to look ashamed as he handed her extra water and some dried meat. "Fort Larned should be maybe 2 weeks northeast," he said, pointing vaguely. "You follow the sun in the morning, keep it on your left side. You should find it." Then they were gone, and Rebecca stood alone on an endless sea of grass with a baby in her arms and a wagon she barely knew how to handle. The first day alone wasn't so bad. She kept herself busy, talking to the horses, singing to Lucy, pretending this was all fine and normal. The second day was harder. The wind picked up hot and dry, making her lips crack. The third day, one of the horses seemed to be limping slightly, and panic started creeping in around the edges of her mind. By the fourth night, Lucy started feeling warm. Too warm. Rebecca had dealt with childhood fevers before, back when she helped her mother tend to neighbor kids. But out here, with no clean water nearby, no herbs, no doctor, no help at all, a fever was terrifying. She tried everything she could think of. She used precious water to cool Lucy's forehead. She held her close, then worried her body heat was making it worse, and laid her in the wagon on cool cloth. Lucy cried weakly, a sound that tore at Rebecca's heart worse than any pain she'd felt herself. On the 5th day, Rebecca's milk dried up. It happened sometimes when women were too stressed or too hungry or too tired. She tried to get Lucy to drink water from a cloth, but the baby was getting weaker. Her little face was flushed with fever, her eyes glassy and unfocused. That's when Rebecca started to break inside. She'd been strong through Daniel's death. She'd been brave when the Henderson brothers left. But watching her baby suffer, knowing she had no way to help, feeling her own body fail to provide what Lucy needed most, it was too much. The 6th morning, Rebecca woke to see smoke on the horizon. For a moment, hope flooded through her. People meant help, meant food, meant maybe medicine for Lucy. Then reality hit. Out here, smoke probably meant Indians. The very thing the Henderson brothers had been so afraid of. Rebecca sat in the wagon holding Lucy's burning body and faced an impossible choice. She could avoid the smoke, try to keep going, and watch her daughter slowly die. Or she could go toward it, risk whatever might happen to her, but maybe, just maybe, save Lucy's life. She thought about her mother back in Ohio. She thought about Daniel buried under the prairie grass. She thought about all the dreams they'd had for their family, for little Lucy's future. Then she climbed down from the wagon, took Lucy in her arms, and started walking toward the smoke. Her legs shook with weakness. Her throat was so dry she could barely swallow, but she kept moving, one step at a time, carrying her dying baby toward an uncertain fate. Because what else could a mother do? When you've lost everything except your child and that child is slipping away too, you'll walk into fire itself if there's even the smallest chance of saving them. Rebecca knew this in her bones. Whatever waited at that camp, whether it was help or harm, at least she was doing something. At least she was trying. The smoke grew closer as the sun climbed higher. Rebecca could make out shapes now, tents made of animal skins, figures moving around. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Every story she'd ever heard about Indian attacks rushed through her mind. But Lucy made a small, weak sound, and Rebecca pushed those thoughts away. She was a mother before she was anything else, and right now her baby needed her to be braver than she'd ever been in her life. So she kept walking. Straight toward that camp, straight toward the unknown, praying to God that she wasn't walking them both toward their end. Rebecca's legs gave out about 50 yards from the camp. She fell to her knees in the dirt, still clutching Lucy against her chest. The baby's fever had gotten worse through the night, and now she barely moved at all. That terrible stillness scared Rebecca more than the crying had. 3 men appeared in front of her. They seemed to materialize from nowhere, though they must have been watching her stumble toward their camp for a while. They wore leather clothes and had long dark hair. One had a bow slung across his back. Another carried a rifle. The third, the tallest one, carried nothing at all. Rebecca tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The sound that came out was more like a croak. She looked up at them, squinting against the morning sun behind their heads. They stood completely still, watching her. Their faces showed nothing, no anger, no curiosity, nothing at all. The tall one in the middle took a step forward. He had a scar running from his eyebrow down to his cheek, pale against his brown skin. His eyes were dark, so dark Rebecca couldn't tell where the pupil ended and the iris began. He looked at her for a long moment, then looked down at Lucy in her arms. Rebecca's mind was racing, desperate, breaking apart. She'd walked all this way, risked everything, and now here she was on her knees in front of these men with her dying baby. The thought that came next wasn't rational. It was insane. But when you're drowning, you'll grab at anything, even if it's a stone that'll pull you down faster. "Please," she managed to whisper. Then louder, "Please." She held Lucy out toward the tall man with the scar. Her hands shook so badly she was afraid she'd drop the baby. Tears started running down her face, cutting clean lines through the dust caked on her cheeks. "Take her," Rebecca said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Take my baby." "Just give us food. Give her medicine, please. She's dying." "I can't. I don't have anything. No milk, no water, nothing. Just take her. She can be yours. Just please help her, please." The words hung in the air between them. Rebecca realized what she'd just said, what she'd just offered, and the horror of it crashed over her like a wave. But she didn't take it back. She couldn't, because Lucy's life mattered more than Rebecca's shame, more than anything. The tall man didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there looking down at her with those unreadable dark eyes. The silence stretched out, became unbearable. Rebecca's arms were still extended, still holding Lucy out to him. The baby was so quiet, so terribly quiet. "Please," Rebecca said again, her voice breaking. "Please say something," but he didn't. He just kept standing there, frozen like a statue. 10 seconds passed. 20, 30. Rebecca's arms started to ache from holding Lucy out like that. The other 2 men shifted their weight, looking uncomfortable. They said something to the tall man in their language, words that sounded like water running over rocks. The tall man finally moved, but not the way Rebecca expected. He didn't take Lucy. He didn't say yes or no. He just turned around and started walking back toward the camp. Rebecca's heart dropped into her stomach. She'd been refused. He'd looked at her desperate offer and walked away. She pulled Lucy back against her chest, holding her tight, and started to sob. She'd failed. She'd offered her baby, her soul, everything she had, and it hadn't been enough. Then the tall man stopped about 10 yards away. He turned his head slightly, not quite looking back at her, and made a small gesture with his hand. A simple motion that clearly meant, "Follow me." Rebecca struggled to her feet, swaying. Her legs didn't want to hold her anymore, but she forced them to work, forced herself to stumble after him. The other two men moved aside to let her pass. She noticed they weren't threatening her, just watching with that same neutral expression. The camp was bigger than she'd thought. Maybe 15 or 20 tents spread out in a rough circle. People stopped what they were doing to stare as she followed the tall man through the center of camp. Women holding baskets, children playing some kind of game, an old man working on what looked like a bow. Nobody said anything. The whole camp had gone quiet, watching this strange white woman with her sick baby following one of their warriors. The tall man led her to a tent near the edge of the circle. He stopped outside and made a sound, not quite a word, more like a call. A moment later, an old woman pushed aside the tent flap and stepped out. She was tiny, barely came up to Rebecca's shoulder, and her face was so wrinkled it looked like leather left out in the sun too long. But her eyes were sharp and bright, missing nothing. She looked at Rebecca, then at Lucy, and her expression changed. The neutrality fell away, replaced by something Rebecca recognized: concern. The old woman spoke rapidly to the tall man in their language. Her voice was higher than Rebecca expected, almost musical despite the harsh-sounding words. The tall man responded, his voice low and quiet. Rebecca caught him making the same gesture she'd made, holding out his arms like he was offering something. The old woman's eyes went wide. She looked at Rebecca with something that might have been shock or might have been pity. Then she reached out and gently took Lucy from Rebecca's arms. "No," Rebecca said instinctively, her arms suddenly empty and aching. "Wait, But the old woman was already disappearing into the tent with Lucy. Rebecca tried to follow, but the tall man stepped in front of her, blocking her path. For the first time, he looked directly into her eyes. His expression was still hard to read, but there was something there now. Something that hadn't been before. Not quite kindness, but not cruelty either. Something in between. He pointed at the tent, then at Rebecca, then made a sitting motion. The meaning was clear. Wait here. Rebecca wanted to argue, wanted to push past him and grab her baby back. But she had no strength left. Her legs finally gave up entirely, and she collapsed right there outside the tent. She expected to hit the hard ground, but the tall man caught her, his hands surprisingly gentle as he lowered her down. He said something she didn't understand, then disappeared. Rebecca sat there, her back against the tent, listening to sounds from inside. The old woman's voice, soft now, almost singing. Lucy making small sounds, not crying exactly, but not silent either. At least she was making sounds. At least she was still alive. The tall man came back carrying a water skin. He knelt down beside Rebecca and held it out to her. She took it with shaking hands and drank. The water was warm and tasted slightly strange, but it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever tasted. She drank until he gently pulled the skin away, probably worried she'd make herself sick. He stood up and walked away again without a word. Rebecca leaned her head back against the tent and closed her eyes. She'd done it. She'd offered her baby to a stranger, to someone from a completely different world, and he'd, accepted? She didn't know. She didn't know anything anymore. All she knew was that Lucy was with someone who seemed to know about medicine, and that was more than Rebecca had been able to give her. Whether that made her the worst mother in the world or just a desperate one, she was too tired to figure out right now. Inside the tent, the old woman kept singing in that strange language, and Lucy kept making those small sounds that meant she was breathing. She was alive. She was still here. For now, that was enough. It had to be. Rebecca existed in a strange fog for the next 3 days. Time stopped making sense. Sometimes it felt like minutes had passed, sometimes like years. The old woman, whose name Rebecca didn't know, kept coming in and out of her awareness like a dream. The tent was dim inside, lit only by sunlight filtering through the hide walls. It smelled of smoke and herbs, not unpleasant, but completely unfamiliar. Rebecca lay on soft furs that someone had spread on the ground. She didn't remember being moved inside, didn't remember lying down. The fever that had been building in her own body for days finally took over, and everything became pieces, fragments, moments that didn't quite connect. She remembered the old woman's hands on her forehead, cool and gentle. She remembered drinking bitter tea that made her throat burn. She remembered Lucy crying, which actually made her heart leap with relief because crying meant alive, meant strong enough to complain. The tall man with the scar came and went. Sometimes Rebecca opened her eyes and he'd be sitting near the tent entrance, completely still, just watching. Not in a threatening way, just watching like you'd watch a fire or the sky. Other times she'd wake up and find food beside her, dried meat that she could barely chew, or more of that bitter tea in a wooden cup. On what she thought was the second day, Rebecca was aware enough to watch the old woman working on Lucy. The baby lay on a soft piece of leather, naked except for a cloth around her bottom. Her skin was still too pink, still too hot, but not as terrifyingly hot as before. The old woman was rubbing something on Lucy's chest, a paste that looked greenish in the dim light. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Rebecca tried to speak, to ask what the paste was, if Lucy would be okay, but her throat wouldn't work properly. The old woman looked over at her and smiled, the first smile Rebecca had seen since entering this camp. She said something in her language, soft and musical, then went back to tending Lucy. That night, or maybe it was the next night, Rebecca woke to find the tall man sitting beside her. Actually sitting not across the tent but right there within arm's reach. He had a wet cloth in his hand and he was wiping her face with it. The coolness felt incredible against her burning skin. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them looked away. In the dim firelight, his scar looked less harsh, just a line that showed he'd lived through something difficult. His eyes weren't as unreadable as she'd first thought. There was pain there, old pain, the kind that never quite goes away. He said something in his language, low and quiet. Rebecca had no idea what the words meant, but the tone was almost gentle. Then he set the cloth aside and left the tent. The fever broke sometime in the middle of the third night. Rebecca woke up drenched in sweat but clear-headed for the first time in days. The tent was dark except for the faint glow of coals in a small fire pit. She sat up slowly, her head spinning a little, and looked around. Lucy was asleep in a small cradleboard thing propped against the tent wall. Rebecca could hear her breathing, steady and even. Not the rapid, shallow breathing of fever, but the deep breathing of real sleep. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She crawled over to her daughter, ignoring how her arms shook with the effort. She put her hand on Lucy's forehead, cool. Not cold, not hot, just normal. The baby stirred a little at her touch but didn't wake up. Her little face looked peaceful, healthy even. "Thank God," Rebecca whispered. "Thank God, thank God, thank God." The old woman must have heard her moving because the tent flap opened and she came in. She looked at Rebecca, then at Lucy, and nodded with satisfaction. She said something that Rebecca still couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear enough. "The baby is better." Rebecca tried to say thank you, but the words came out as sobs. She cried harder than she'd cried when Daniel died. Harder than when the Henderson brothers left. Harder than she'd ever cried in her life. It all came pouring out at once, every bit of fear and grief and exhaustion from the past weeks. The old woman sat down beside her and put a thin arm around her shoulders. She didn't say anything, didn't try to shush her or tell her to stop. She just sat there, this stranger from a completely different world, holding Rebecca while she fell apart. When Rebecca finally cried herself out, the old woman handed her a cup of water. Not the bitter tea this time, just water. Rebecca drank it all, then wiped her face on her sleeve. "Thank you," she said, even though she knew the woman didn't understand English. "Thank you for saving her." The old woman patted her hand and stood up. She stirred the coals in the fire pit and added a few small sticks, bringing more light into the tent. Then she brought over a wooden bowl filled with some kind of stew. The smell made Rebecca's stomach growl loud enough to be embarrassing. She ate slowly, forcing herself not to gulp it down even though she was starving. The stew was good, full of meat and something that might have been wild onions. While she ate, the old woman picked up Lucy's cradleboard and brought it over, setting it down where Rebecca could see her daughter clearly. Lucy's color was so much better. Her little chest rose and fell peacefully. One tiny fist was curled up near her mouth. She looked perfect, like nothing had ever been wrong at all. Rebecca finished the stew and set the bowl aside. She looked at the old woman, really looked at her, seeing her as a person and not just a blur in her fevered confusion. The woman had lines around her eyes from years of smiling. Her hands were gnarled with age but moved with grace. She wore a dress made of soft leather with beadwork on the front, beautiful patterns in red and blue. "I don't know your name," Rebecca said. "I don't even know where I am exactly. I don't know what happens now." The old woman tilted her head, listening to the tone if not the words. She reached out and touched Rebecca's chest right over her heart, then touched her own chest the same way. Then she pointed at Lucy. The gesture said, "You, me, baby, connected now. Family maybe, or something like it." A sound at the tent entrance made them both look up. The tall man was standing there, his shape dark against the early morning light outside. He'd been there for a while, Rebecca realized. Watching. Always watching. He stepped inside and knelt down near the fire. For the first time since this all began, he spoke directly to Rebecca in English. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much, and his accent was strong, but she could understand him. "Baby is strong," he said slowly, carefully choosing each word. "Mother is not." Rebecca didn't know if he meant she wasn't strong or that she wasn't well yet or something else entirely. Before she could ask, he continued, "You rest, eat, get strong. Then we talk." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't really even a command. It was just a statement of fact. There were things that needed to be discussed, decisions to be made, but not now. Not while she was barely recovered and trying to figure out how to feel about still being alive. Rebecca nodded. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The tall man looked at Lucy for a long moment, something crossing his face too quick to identify. Then he stood and left the tent without another word. The old woman made a sound that might have been approval or might have been amusement. She pointed at the furs where Rebecca had been sleeping, clearly telling her to rest more. Rebecca was about to argue that she'd slept enough, but a wave of exhaustion hit her and she realized the woman was right. She lay back down, positioning herself where she could still see Lucy and the cradleboard. The old woman covered her with a soft blanket made of rabbit fur and patted her shoulder. As Rebecca drifted back to sleep, one thought kept circling in her mind. She'd offered her baby to save her life. The offer had been accepted, she was pretty sure of that now. But what exactly had she agreed to? And what did it mean that they'd saved both Lucy and her? Those questions would need answers eventually. But right now, with her daughter breathing peacefully nearby and her own body finally starting to heal, Rebecca let them fade into the background. She'd face whatever came next when she had the strength for it. Right now, being alive was enough. A week passed before Rebecca started to understand what she'd actually done. The days fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. She'd wake up, feed Lucy, eat whatever food the old woman brought, and slowly regain her strength. The old woman, who Rebecca learned was called something that sounded like morning bird or maybe early wing, was patient and kind, teaching her small things without words. How to change Lucy using soft pieces of leather instead of cloth diapers. How to wear a blanket wrapped around her shoulders in the way the women here did. Which plants were safe to touch and which would make her skin itch. Simple things, survival things, but each lesson felt like stepping further into a world Rebecca didn't quite understand yet. The tall warrior came by every day, usually in the evening. He never stayed long, just checked on them, brought things they might need. Firewood, extra furs as the nights got cooler. Once a small toy carved from wood, a simple animal shape that Lucy was still too young to appreciate, but that Rebecca found surprisingly beautiful. He still didn't talk much. A few words here and there in broken English, checking if they needed anything. Rebecca tried to ask questions a few times, but he always just shook his head and left. It was frustrating, this not knowing, but she was still too weak to push the issue. Then Morningbird started teaching her words. Not English, but the language the people here spoke. Simple words at first. Water, fire, food, sky. Lucy learned to point at things and Morningbird would say the word. Then make Rebecca repeat it until she got the sounds right. The word for baby was child small. The word for mother was she who feeds. The word for this place, the camp, meant something like circle of lodges. Each word opened a tiny window into how these people saw the world, and Rebecca found herself hungry to learn more. One afternoon, while Morningbird was showing Rebecca how to scrape an animal hide, 3 women from the camp came to visit. They brought food and looked at Lucy with warm smiles. cooing at her the way women everywhere coo at babies. They talked to Morning Bird in rapid sentences, occasionally glancing at Rebecca with expressions she couldn't quite read. Curious, maybe, or concerned. After they left, Rebecca tried to ask Morning Bird what they'd said. The old woman thought for a moment, then started using the words Rebecca had learned, mixing them with gestures to fill in the gaps. She pointed at the tall warrior, who was visible across the camp working on something with another man. Then she made a gesture like cradling a baby, pointed at Lucy, and shook her head sadly. She held up one finger, then another, meaning two people, a woman and a baby, Rebecca understood. The warrior had lost them. Then Morning Bird pointed at Rebecca and Lucy and made a motion like giving something, like an offering. She pointed at the tall warrior again and nodded. The meaning crashed over Rebecca like cold water. The warrior had lost his wife and child. Rebecca had offered her child to him. He'd accepted. "Oh God," Rebecca whispered. "What did I do?" Morning Bird seemed to understand the tone, if not the words. She patted Rebecca's hand, not unkindly, but not exactly comforting either. It was more like she was saying, "Yes, you did that. Now you deal with it." That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. Lucy was peaceful in her cradleboard, making those small snuffling sounds babies make. The fire had burned down to coals. Morning Bird was asleep on the other side of the tent, breathing deeply. Rebecca stared at the hide ceiling and tried to piece it all together. She'd stumbled into the camp, desperate and half dead. She'd offered her baby. The warrior had seen it as an answer to something. Maybe prayers, maybe just grief that needed filling. And now, what? What was she? What was Lucy? Were they prisoners, slaves? The word made her shudder, but she forced herself to think it. She'd heard stories back east about people being taken by Indians, held captive, but this didn't feel like being a captive. Nobody guarded the tent. Nobody stopped her from moving around the camp. People were actually quite friendly when she ran into them, offering small nods or gestures of greeting, but she wasn't free either. She had no horse, no wagon, no supplies. She didn't know where she was or how to get anywhere else. And more than that, there was the weight of what she'd said, what she'd offered. You can't just take back words like that, especially not when someone had acted on them, had saved your baby's life based on those words. Rebecca turned on her side and looked at Lucy sleeping peacefully. Her daughter looked so healthy now, like the fever had never happened. The warrior and Morning Bird had done that. They'd saved her when Rebecca couldn't, but at what cost? The answer came 2 days later. Rebecca was outside the tent, practicing the leather scraping technique Morning Bird had shown her. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done back in Ohio, but it felt good to be useful again, to be doing something productive. The warrior approached, and this time he wasn't alone. An older man walked with him, someone Rebecca had seen around the camp but never spoken to. The older man wore his hair in braids and had a bearing that suggested he was important somehow, a leader maybe. The warrior said something to the older man, who then turned to Rebecca and spoke in English. His accent was much lighter than the warrior's, and his words came easily. "I learned your language many years ago," the older man said. "From traders. I will help you understand." Rebecca set down the scraping tool and stood up, her heart starting to pound. "Understand what? What has happened here? What you agreed to?" The warrior stood silently while the older man explained. When Rebecca had offered her baby, it had been witnessed by the other warriors. In their way of doing things, such an offer, once made and accepted, was binding. Like a trade, like a promise that couldn't be broken. "But I didn't know," Rebecca said, her voice shaking. "I was desperate. I was just trying to save her." "Yes," the older man said gently. "We know this." But the offer was still made. And he gestured to the warrior, accepted it. In our way, this means the child is his now, and you, as the child's mother, are also his responsibility. Rebecca felt the ground tilt under her feet. His responsibility? What does that mean? The older man spoke to the warrior, who responded in a few quiet words. The older man turned back to Rebecca. "It means you and the child belong to his lodge now. You are part of his family. He will provide for you, protect you. In return, you will work as the women of his lodge work. Like a wife?" Rebecca's voice came out as barely a whisper. The older man considered this. "Not exactly. Not unless he takes you as wife properly, with ceremony. Right now you are under his protection, his claim. But what that becomes depends on many things. Rebecca looked at the warrior who was watching her with that same unreadable expression. And if I say no? If I want to leave? The question hung in the air. The older man spoke to the warrior again, a longer exchange this time. Finally, he turned back to Rebecca. He says you are not a prisoner, but he also says the child is his now by the offer you made. If you wish to leave, you may go. But the child stays. Rebecca's blood ran cold. He can't just take my baby. He did not take her. The older man said, his voice still gentle but firm. You gave her. He accepted. He saved her life. This is done. Rebecca looked down at Lucy, who was crawling around on a blanket near the tent, blissfully unaware of the conversation happening above her. The thought of walking away without her daughter made Rebecca's chest feel like it was being crushed. And if I stay? She asked quietly. Then you are part of this lodge, part of this family until he says otherwise. The warrior spoke again. More words this time, his tone serious. The older man listened, nodded, and translated. He says he did not plan this. He did not ask for this. When you came to the camp, he had been in mourning for his wife and child for many moons. The grief was heavy. He had prayed for a reason to keep living, but he did not expect an answer like this. The older man paused. He says your offer was a sign from the spirits. He says the child has brought light back to his lodge. He will care for her as his own. And he will care for you if you choose to stay. Rebecca's mind was spinning. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But it was. The warrior stood there, solid and real, waiting for her answer. Lucy made a happy sound, having found a stick to play with. Morningbird had come out of the tent and was watching quietly, her wrinkled face sympathetic. I need time, Rebecca said. I need to think. The older man spoke to the warrior, who nodded once. The older man turned back to Rebecca. You have time, but understand the longer you stay here, the more this becomes your life. Choose soon. Then both men walked away, leaving Rebecca standing there with her thoughts crashing around like waves in a storm. She'd thought she was just offering her baby for medicine, for food, for a chance at survival. She hadn't understood she was offering their entire lives, their entire future. And now she had to decide. Walk away from her daughter, or stay in this strange world forever. That night, Rebecca held Lucy close and cried as quietly as she could. Morningbird pretended not to notice, but she moved closer to the fire, humming one of those wordless songs she sometimes sang. It wasn't quite comfort, but it was companionship, and right now that was something. Rebecca kissed Lucy's head, breathing in that sweet baby smell. Her daughter looked up at her and smiled, showing her 2 tiny teeth. She had no idea how close she'd come to dying. September turned into October, and the camp started preparing for winter. Rebecca watched the change happen around her, still undecided about what she was going to do. Every morning she'd wake up thinking today was the day she'd ask to leave. Every evening she'd go to sleep having said nothing. The truth was she had nowhere to go. No money, no supplies, no way to survive out there with a baby. The logical part of her brain knew this, but admitting it felt like giving up, like accepting defeat, like agreeing that offering Lucy had been the right choice instead of a moment of desperate madness. The work kept her busy enough that she didn't have to think too much. Morningbird taught her how to do things the women here did. Tanning hides was backbreaking work, scraping and stretching and treating the leather until it was soft. Preparing food meant grinding dried corn, cutting meat into strips for drying, digging for roots that Rebecca had never seen before. Her hands, which had been soft from her life in Ohio, became rough and calloused. Her back hurt constantly those first few weeks, but there was something satisfying about it too, about making things with her hands, about being useful. The warrior whose name she'd learned was 2 Ravens, watched all of this from a distance. He never interfered, never told her what to do, just watched. Sometimes Rebecca would catch him looking at Lucy with an expression that made her chest ache. It was the look of someone who'd lost everything and couldn't quite believe he was being given a second chance. One afternoon in late October, a group of young boys were playing rough near the tents. One of them, running backward and laughing, crashed into Rebecca, knocking her flat. The clay pot she'd been carrying shattered, water spilling everywhere. The boy's face went pale with fear. He started backing away, speaking rapidly in his language, clearly apologizing. Rebecca was just brushing herself off, about to tell him it was fine even if he couldn't understand, when two ravens appeared. He stepped between Rebecca and the boy, and for a moment she thought he was going to be angry at her for the broken pot. Instead, he turned to the boy and spoke firmly but not harshly. The boy's eyes went wide. He nodded vigorously, then ran off. Two ravens turned to Rebecca, checking her over with his eyes to make sure she wasn't hurt. When he was satisfied, he bent down and started picking up the broken pieces of the pot. "I can do that," Rebecca said. He ignored her and kept picking up the pieces. Morningbird came over, clicking her tongue at the mess, and brought another pot. She said something to Two Ravens that made him straighten up and respond in a tone Rebecca had never heard from him before, almost defensive. Later that evening, Morningbird tried to explain what had happened. Using the words Rebecca knew and elaborate gestures, she told a story. Two ravens had been young once, she indicated. He'd been different, soft-hearted. He'd found a baby eagle that had fallen from its nest. Another boy had hurt the eagle, damaged its wing. Two ravens had taken the eagle and cared for it, even though the other boys mocked him for it. Even though he'd been beaten for interfering, Eagle lived, Morningbird said in careful English words she'd learned. "Boy learned," she pointed at two ravens across the camp. "He protect weak things always. Make him different. Make him quiet." Rebecca watched two ravens working on repairing a bow, his movements methodical and patient. She was starting to understand that his silence wasn't coldness. It was something else, something deeper. He didn't use words because words had failed him before, or because the things he felt were too big for words. As the weather got colder, the camp moved to a more sheltered location in a valley between hills. The whole community worked together, taking down tents, packing everything, moving as one unit. Rebecca found herself part of it without quite knowing how it happened. She walked with the women, carrying Lucy on her back in the way they'd taught her. She helped set up the tent in the new location. She gathered firewood with the other women, their breath making clouds in the cold air. Winter hit hard and fast. One week it was chilly. The next week there was snow on the ground and ice in the water buckets. The tent that had seemed spacious in summer felt small and intimate now, with Morningbird, Rebecca, and Lucy all huddled close to the fire for warmth. Two ravens slept by the entrance, wrapped in thick furs, acting as a barrier between them and the cold outside. Rebecca hadn't understood at first why he slept there instead of in the warm center near the fire. Morningbird explained that it was proper, respectful. He was protecting them, but also showing he understood boundaries. One particularly cold night, Lucy woke up crying. Rebecca tried everything to soothe her, but the baby was inconsolable. She wasn't sick, just uncomfortable and cranky from the cold. Her little nose was red and her fingers were like ice. Two ravens sat up from his sleeping place and watched for a moment. Then, without asking permission, he reached out and took Lucy from Rebecca's arms. Rebecca's instinct was to protest, to grab her back, but something in his face stopped her. He cradled Lucy against his chest, wrapping his warmest fur around both of them. Then he started humming, a low sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. It wasn't quite a song, more like a vibration, a rumble that Lucy could probably feel as much as hear. The baby's crying slowed, then stopped. She looked up at two ravens with wide eyes, fascinated by this new sound. He kept humming, rocking slightly, and within minutes Lucy was asleep again. Two ravens looked at Rebecca over Lucy's head. In the firelight, his scarred face looked softer somehow, less intimidating. He held out the sleeping baby and Rebecca took her back, feeling the warmth that had built up between them. "Thank you," Rebecca whispered. He nodded once and lay back down in his spot by the entrance. But something had shifted. Rebecca couldn't quite name it, but she felt it like a change in the air before a storm. The next morning, Morningbird was teaching Rebecca how to make proper winter moccasins when two women from the camp came to visit. They were younger, probably Rebecca's age, and they brought food and stayed to help with the work. They chattered away in their language, occasionally looking at Rebecca with friendly curiosity. One of them, a pretty woman with long braids, kept looking toward where Two Ravens was working outside. She said something that made the other woman laugh and Morningbird shake her head disapprovingly. The woman with braids made a gesture like drawing a line across her face, clearly talking about Two Ravens' scar. Morningbird spoke sharply, and the woman looked properly chastised. Morningbird then turned to Rebecca and began another story. using simple words and gestures. Two Ravens' wife had died in the sickness, Morningbird explained. The sickness that came from the white man's blankets that killed so many. His baby son had died too, only a few days old when the sickness took him. Two Ravens had cut his hair short in mourning, which was their way. He'd lived alone through the whole winter, refusing to eat with the others, barely speaking. The tribe had been worried, Morningbird indicated. They thought he might die from sadness, just stop living because he wanted to be with his family. The medicine people had tried to help him. His friends had tried to help him. Nothing worked. Then you come, Morningbird said, pointing at Rebecca. With baby. He thinks spirits send answer to prayers. He pray for reason to live. You come. Rebecca felt something tighten in her chest. She'd been so focused on what this meant for her and Lucy that she hadn't really thought about what it meant for him. She'd seen him as a stranger who'd claimed them, almost like an enemy. But he was just a man who'd lost everything and had somehow been given a piece of it back. That night, after Lucy was asleep and Morningbird was snoring softly, Rebecca sat by the fire thinking. Two Ravens was still awake at his post by the entrance. She could see his silhouette against the tent wall, sitting upright, always watchful. Two Ravens? She said quietly, using his name for the first time. He turned his head slightly, listening. Why two Ravens? Your name. Why that name? He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then in his slow, careful English, Ravens. They mate for life. Two always together. One dies, the other stays close to the body for days. Loyal. Faithful. My father named me this because I born same day two ravens built nest outside our tent. He paused, then added even more quietly, wife liked the ravens. She said name fit me, said I was loyal like them. Rebecca heard the pain in his voice, the grief that still lived just under the surface. She was right, Rebecca said. You are loyal. You saved us when you didn't have to. You've been kind when you could have been harsh. He didn't respond, but his silhouette shifted slightly, like maybe her words had meant something. Rebecca wrapped her blanket tighter around herself. Outside wind howled through the valley, making the tent shake slightly. Inside was warm and safe. Lucy was healthy and growing stronger every day. Morningbird had become almost like a grandmother. And two ravens, this silent warrior who'd lost so much, was protecting them with the same loyalty he'd shown to the ravens he was named for. Maybe staying wasn't giving up. Maybe it was just surviving, and maybe survival was enough for now. December brought snow that piled up past the bottom of the tent walls. Rebecca had never seen winter like this, even in Ohio. The wind cut like knives, and going outside even for a few minutes meant coming back with frozen fingers and a face that hurt from the cold. The camp drew inward, families staying in their tents more, venturing out only for necessary things, wood gathering, bringing in snow to melt for water, quick trips to check on neighbors. The long dark hours meant lots of time sitting by the fire, and that meant lots of time for people to talk. Morningbird, it turned out, knew more English than she'd been letting on. As winter deepened, she started using it more, teaching Rebecca not just words but whole sentences. And with those sentences came stories. Stories about the old days before the white settlers came in such numbers. Stories about great hunts and brave warriors. Stories about how the world came to be, full of spirits and animals that could talk. Lucy would sit in Rebecca's lap, playing with small toys two ravens had carved, while Morningbird's voice wove pictures in the fire-lit darkness. Two ravens listened too, though he rarely added anything. But sometimes when Morningbird got a detail wrong or forgot part of a story, he'd quietly correct her. And slowly, so slowly, Rebecca almost didn't notice it happening, he started speaking more. Not a lot. He'd never be a talkative man. But small things. More wood needed. Storm coming tomorrow. Baby likes that one, pointing to a particular carved animal that made Lucy laugh. One evening, he came back to the tent with something wrapped in cloth. He set it down by the fire and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a piece of soft deerskin already cut and shaped. For baby, he said, looking at Rebecca. Feet getting cold. He'd made tiny moccasins for Lucy, so small they fit in the palm of Rebecca's hand. The stitching was careful and even, the leather soft as cloth. Rebecca looked up at him, surprised by the sudden tightness in her throat. These are beautiful, she said. Thank you. He nodded and turned away, but not before Rebecca saw something cross his face. Not quite a smile, but something close, something warm. Lucy loved the moccasins, kept pulling them off and trying to eat them, which made everyone laugh. The sound of laughter in the tent felt good, felt normal, like they were becoming something real instead of just strangers sharing space. But not everything was easy. Rebecca still woke up sometimes thinking about Daniel, feeling guilty that she was alive and he wasn't, that she was here living this strange life while he was buried under prairie grass. She'd catch herself enjoying a moment, a conversation with Morning Bird or watching two ravens teach Lucy to clap her hands, and then the guilt would crash down. She was living with another man, even if nothing improper was happening. She was letting her daughter bond with him, call him the name that meant father in his language. Was she betraying Daniel's memory? Was she being practical? She didn't know. One particularly hard night, she cried quietly into her furs. She thought everyone was asleep, but Two Raven's voice came soft from his spot by the entrance. Rebecca. It was maybe the third time he'd used her name. She wiped her face quickly. I'm fine. You cry many nights. Missing someone? She was surprised he'd noticed, surprised he was asking. My husband, Daniel, he died on the trail. Then, tell me about him. So she did. In whispers, so as not to wake Morning Bird and Lucy, Rebecca told Two Ravens about Daniel. How they'd met at a church social, how he'd been so excited about going west, about building something of their own, how he'd been a good man, a kind man even if he hadn't been perfect. Two Ravens listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. My wife's name meant Winter Moon. She laughed at everything, even my bad jokes. His voice caught slightly. She liked to sing while working, made everything feel lighter. It was the most he'd ever said at once. Rebecca felt honored somehow that he'd shared this. I don't want to forget Daniel, Rebecca said. But I also don't want to live in the past forever. I don't know how to do both. You honor him by living, Two Ravens said, by caring for his daughter, by surviving when it would be easier to give up. This is not betrayal. This is strength. His words settled something in Rebecca's chest. Some knot she hadn't known was there. They didn't talk more that night, but something had shifted again, deepened. As winter wore on, necessity forced them closer. When the coldest snap hit in January, even with the fire burning constantly, the tent was brutally cold. Morning Bird suggested, through both words and firm gestures, that they should all sleep closer together for warmth. Rebecca hesitated, but Two Ravens simply moved his furs closer to the fire and lay down with his back to everyone else, creating a wall of warmth without being inappropriate. Morning Bird lay on one side of Lucy's cradleboard, Rebecca on the other, and the shared body heat made all the difference. It was strange at first, this closeness. Rebecca could hear Two Ravens breathing in his sleep, could see the rise and fall of his shoulders. But it stopped feeling strange after a few nights. It just felt safe. Lucy was growing fast, trying to crawl now, making sounds that were almost words. She'd babble away and Morning Bird would respond in their language and Two Ravens would smile, actually smile watching them. He was particularly amused when Lucy grabbed his nose one day and wouldn't let go, laughing while he made exaggerated faces. She has your spirit, he told Rebecca. Brave, won't give up. She has everyone's spirit, Rebecca said, watching Lucy pull on Morning Bird's braids now. She's learning from all of us, and that was true. Lucy was becoming something unique, a child of multiple worlds. She heard English from Rebecca and their language from everyone else. She was learning two ways of seeing everything, two ways of being in the world. One afternoon, the weather cleared enough for people to move around the camp. The children came out to play in the snow, and Two Ravens took Lucy outside. Bundled in so many layers she looked like a small round ball. Rebecca watched from the tent entrance as he showed Lucy the snow, let her touch it with her mittened hands, her face full of wonder. A woman from the camp came to stand beside Rebecca. It was the pretty one with braids who'd visited before. She spoke in careful English. Two Ravens is good man. Was very sad before. Now has light in eyes again. You and baby bring this. Rebecca didn't know what to say to that. The woman continued. Some people worried at first. White woman in camp. But you work hard. Learn our ways. Respect us. This is good. You belong here now. You belong here now. The words echoed in Rebecca's head long after the woman left. Did she belong? Could she belong? The camp had stopped feeling completely foreign. She knew most people by sight now, could greet them properly in their language. She understood the daily rhythms, the unspoken rules, the way everyone worked together to survive. That night, after Lucy was asleep and Morningbird was humming to herself while mending clothes, two ravens came to sit near Rebecca by the fire. Not right next to her, but close enough to talk quietly. Winter almost over, he said. Spring coming soon. Rebecca's heart skipped. Spring meant the camp would move again. Spring meant change. Spring meant decisions. What happens in spring? She asked. Two ravens poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks fly up. Camp moves to summer grounds. Better hunting. More food. He paused. Fort is 4 days' ride from summer camp. If you want to leave, spring is best time. Before baby walks, before it gets too hot. He was giving her a way out. Still giving her that choice, even after all these months. Rebecca looked at Lucy, at Morningbird, at the tent that had become home. She thought about the world outside the camp. The world of forts and settlers and people who'd look at her with judgment for living here. She thought about trying to make a life alone with Lucy. No husband, no family, nothing. Then she thought about this place. These people who'd taken her in. Morningbird who'd become family. Two ravens who'd given them safety and care without asking anything in return. The other women who'd taught her and befriended her. Lucy growing up strong and loved. Can I ask you something? Rebecca said. Two ravens nodded. Why did you accept? That day when I offered Lucy. You could have just given us food and sent us away. Why did you accept the offer? He was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. When my son died, I wanted to die too. Felt empty inside, like my spirit was gone. I prayed to know if I should keep living or join my family in the next world. Next day you came, desperate mother with dying baby, offering everything to save her. He looked at Rebecca directly. That is love worth living for. That is the kind of spirit worth protecting. I saw my wife in you. Saw my son in your baby. Spirits gave me answer. Keep living. Care for them. This is purpose. Rebecca felt tears on her face. I didn't understand what I was offering. I was just trying to save her, I know. But you were willing to give up everything for your child. This is sacred. This is why I accepted. Not to take, but to help. To be part of that love. They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them. Morningbird had fallen asleep in her furs. Lucy was snoring softly, that funny little snore babies make. Outside wind moved through the valley, but inside was warm. Rebecca realized she'd already made her choice. She'd made it weeks ago, maybe even months ago. She'd just been afraid to admit it. March arrived with melting snow and the first hints of green pushing through the brown earth. The camp stirred with new energy after the long winter sleep. People emerged from their tents more. Children played outside without bundling up in quite so many layers, and there was talk of moving to the summer ground soon. Rebecca had been preparing herself to tell two ravens and Morningbird her decision. She'd practiced the words in both languages, trying to find the right way to say that she wanted to stay, that this was her home now. But before she could speak, everything changed. Two young men rode into camp one afternoon, their horses lathered with sweat, their faces grim. Within minutes, the whole camp gathered to hear their news. Rebecca couldn't understand everything they said, but she caught enough words, saw enough reactions, to know it was bad. Soldiers. Attack. Another village. Women and children killed. The camp exploded with grief and rage. Women wailed. Men shouted. Rebecca felt ice form in her stomach as she realized what this meant. She was white. The soldiers who'd done this were white, and now this camp was mourning their dead. She backed toward her tent, clutching Lucy tight. Would they turn on her now? Would they see her as the enemy? Two ravens appeared through the crowd, his face harder than she'd seen it in months. He positioned himself between Rebecca and the gathering of angry men. When some of them moved toward her, he said something sharp and final. They argued with him, voices rising, but he didn't move. Morningbird appeared at Rebecca's side, taking her arm and pulling her into the tent. Stay here, she said in English. Let him handle. Rebecca sat inside, listening to raised voices outside, her heart pounding. Lucy, sensing something wrong, started to cry. Rebecca rocked her automatically, But her mind was racing. This was it. This was the end of whatever peace they'd found here. The voices outside grew louder. Someone was clearly arguing with two ravens, saying things that made other people shout in agreement. Then two ravens' voice cut through everything, commanding and fierce. A long silence followed. Then gradually, the crowd dispersed. Two ravens came into the tent. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists. He looked at Rebecca and said, "You are safe. I told them you are my family. They will respect this. But those soldiers were not you. I know this. Many people know this. Some are too angry to remember right now, but they will." He sat down heavily by the fire. "My friend's sister was killed. 3 children all dead. His rage is, I understand it." Rebecca felt sick. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say." "There is nothing to say. This is war now. Has been war for a long time, but now it will get worse." He looked at her directly. "You need to decide. Stay here, and you might be caught in the middle. Both sides will see you as enemy. Your people will think you were captured, or went savage. My people will always question if you are loyal. It is not safe. What about Lucy?" His expression softened when he looked at the baby. "Lucy is innocent, but she is also part of you, part of the white world. This makes her complicated too." The next few days were tense. Most people in the camp remained friendly to Rebecca, or at least neutral, but a few made their feelings clear. A woman spat at her feet when she went to get water. A man deliberately knocked into her, hard enough to bruise her shoulder. Children stared with hostile eyes instead of the curious ones she'd gotten used to. Morning Bird stayed close, always watching, always protecting. But even she seemed worried. "Maybe you should go to Fort," she said one evening. "Not forever. Just until anger cools. Then come back." Would they let me come back? Morning Bird didn't answer, which was answer enough. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the camp, which felt different now, less safe. The comfort she'd found over the winter seemed fragile, like it could shatter any moment. 2 ravens had been gone all day, meeting with the council of elders and other warriors. When he finally returned, very late, he sat by the fire instead of lying down to sleep. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "we need to talk." She sat up, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. "What did the council say?" "They say you can stay if you choose, but they also say if fighting comes close to camp, they cannot guarantee your safety. Some of the younger warriors, they lost family. Their grief makes them dangerous. And if I go?" 2 ravens stared into the fire. "I will take you to Fort Larned. It is 4 days' ride, maybe 5 with baby. I will make sure you have supplies, give you money for stagecoach to wherever you want to go. East maybe, back to Ohio. And then you are free. Lucy is free. The claim I made, I release it. You owe nothing." Rebecca felt her world tilting again. "You're letting us go?" "I was always going to let you go. I told you you are not prisoner." He looked at her then and his eyes showed pain. "But I hoped you would choose to stay, hoped we could be family, real family." "I was going to tell you I wanted to stay," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "Before all this happened, I'd decided. This is my home now." 2 ravens closed his eyes. "That makes this harder." "Then let me stay, Rebecca." He opened his eyes and she saw grief there, deep and raw. "Winter is easy time. We stay in one place, live simple. But now comes spring, summer. We move with the buffalo. We hunt. And now we might have to fight. Soldiers will come looking for us eventually. When they do, you being here puts everyone in danger. You could be used against us. They could say we kidnapped you, use it as excuse to attack. And if our warriors find you in middle of battle..." He shook his head. "I cannot risk it. Cannot risk you, or Lucy, or my people." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. "So I have to leave. You have to be safe. That matters more than anything." Morningbird had been awake, listening. She spoke up now in her croaky voice. He is right. Your heart wants to stay, but your head must choose what keeps baby safe. What about what Two Ravens wants? Rebecca asked, looking at him. Do you want us to leave? His face showed everything then, all the walls coming down. No, he said roughly. I want you to stay. Want to see Lucy grow up. Want to teach her to ride, to track, to be strong. Want to watch her become the woman she will be. Want you here. Part of this life. Part of my lodge. He swallowed hard. But what I want does not matter. What is safe matters. They sat in silence, the fire burning low between them. Everything Rebecca had found here, all the family and belonging and home she'd discovered, was being taken away. But not by cruelty, by care, by someone putting her safety above his own wants. That somehow made it hurt worse. When do we leave? She finally asked. 3 days. Gives time to prepare, to say goodbye. Those 3 days passed in a blur. The women, who'd become Rebecca's friends, brought gifts for the journey. Dried food, warm blankets, a beautiful beaded pouch for carrying Lucy. They cried and hugged her, speaking blessings she didn't fully understand but felt in her heart. The man who'd knocked into her, still angry, came to the tent on the last day. He spoke in his language, his voice rough. Two Ravens translated. He says he is sorry. His sister was killed with her children. His rage made him forget you are not same as soldiers. He asks forgiveness. Rebecca nodded to the man. Tell him I understand. Tell him I'm sorry for his loss. When the man left, Rebecca turned to Two Ravens. You protected me even when it put you against your own people. You are my people too, he said simply. Morningbird packed Rebecca's things with shaky hands. The old woman had been crying on and off for 2 days. When everything was ready, she pulled Rebecca into a fierce hug. You are daughter to me, she said in broken English. Always. You come back someday, yes? When war is over? I'll try. Rebecca promised, not knowing if it was a promise she could keep. Lucy didn't understand what was happening, but she seemed to sense the sadness. She clung to Two Ravens, who held her like she was made of glass. He kissed her forehead and whispered something in his language that Rebecca didn't catch. When it was time to leave, Two Ravens helped Rebecca onto a horse, then took Lucy and secured her carefully in a special carrier on his own horse. He'd made it himself over the past 3 days, a secure seat that would keep the baby safe during the long ride. The whole camp turned out to watch them go. Some faces were friendly, some neutral, a few still hostile, but they all acknowledged that this was the right decision, the safe decision even if it hurt. As they rode away from the camp, Rebecca turned back once. She could see the circle of tents getting smaller, see the people standing there watching. Morningbird raised her hand in farewell, and Rebecca raised hers in return. Then, Two Ravens urged the horses forward, and the camp disappeared behind the hills. They rode in silence, Lucy content in her carrier, the spring wind blowing across the prairie. Rebecca had found a home and was losing it. She'd found a family and was leaving them. And the man riding beside her, the silent warrior who'd saved her life and given her daughter a father's love, was the one taking her away to keep her safe. Love, Rebecca realized, wasn't always about keeping people close. Sometimes it was about letting them go. The journey to Fort Larned took 5 days instead of 4. Two Ravens kept the pace slow for Lucy's sake, stopping frequently to let Rebecca rest and feed the baby. They camped at night under the stars. Two Ravens always sleeping on the opposite side of the fire, maintaining that respectful distance even now. They didn't talk much during the day. What was there to say? But at night, after Lucy was asleep, they'd sit by the fire and the silence felt different. Not uncomfortable, just sad. Like two people saying goodbye without using words. On the 3rd night, Rebecca finally broke the silence. Tell me about your son. You've never said his name. Two Ravens stared into the flames for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his name meant first light, born as sun was rising. He lived 7 days. Long enough to open his eyes and look at me. Long enough for me to love him completely. I'm sorry, Rebecca whispered. Winter Moon, my wife, she knew she was dying. The sickness was too strong. Her last words were asking me to keep living. To find joy again. I could not imagine how. He looked across the fire at Lucy sleeping peacefully. Then you came. Desperate mother willing to give everything for her child. Baby who needed father. Spirits answered Wintermoon's last wish, I think. Gave me reason to keep living. Rebecca felt tears on her face again. She'd cried more in the past months than in her whole life before. Lucy loves you. She doesn't know you're not her real father. Blood does not make father, Two Ravens said firmly. Love makes father. Care makes father. Being there makes father. In my heart, she is my daughter. This does not change because we leave camp. But I won't be there, Rebecca said. You won't see her grow up. I will remember her always. We'll pray for her. We'll hope life treats her well. He paused. And I will remember you. The woman who walked into camp half dead and left strong, who learned our ways with respect, who made Lodge feel like home again. They sat in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. On the afternoon of the 5th day, Fort Larned appeared on the horizon. Wooden walls, guard towers, the American flag snapping in the wind. It looked harsh and foreign to Rebecca after months in the camp. She realized with a jolt that this world, the white world she'd grown up in, felt strange to her now. Two Ravens stopped the horses about a mile from the fort. We cannot go closer together. They would ask questions, maybe cause trouble for you. Rebecca's stomach clenched. This was it, the goodbye she'd been dreading. Two Ravens dismounted and helped her down. Then he carefully lifted Lucy from her carrier. The baby immediately reached for him, making happy sounds. He held her close, his face showing everything he felt. Be strong, little one, he told Lucy in English so Rebecca could understand. Grow brave. Remember your mother offered everything to save you. This is greatest love. Live worthy of it. He kissed Lucy's forehead, then gently handed her to Rebecca. Lucy immediately started fussing, reaching back toward Two Ravens. The sound tore at Rebecca's heart. Two Ravens reached into his pack and pulled out a bundle wrapped in soft leather. For Lucy, when she is older, he handed it to Rebecca. Things I made for her. Toys, moccasins for when feet get bigger. Story stick to remember where she came from. Rebecca took the bundle, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He pulled out another, smaller bundle. And this for you. Inside was a beautiful necklace made of beads and small shells. In our way, this means you are always part of our lodge. Always family. Distance does not change this. Rebecca clutched the necklace. Two Ravens, Wait, he interrupted. I need to say something. Before you go, you need to understand what happened here. He stepped closer, his dark eyes intense. That day you came to camp, you made offer. You said take baby for food, for medicine. You think you sold her, traded her? But that is not what I heard. Rebecca stared at him, confused. What do you mean? I heard mother saying I cannot save my child alone. Please help me keep her alive. I heard love so big it broke open the whole sky. You did not sell Lucy. You asked for help in only way you could think of in that moment. His voice grew rough with emotion. You were not weak. You were strongest person I ever saw, walking into enemy camp, offering everything, just to save your child. This is what warrior does. This is courage. Rebecca felt something crack open inside her chest. All these months she'd carried shame for that moment. Believed she'd done something unforgivable, but he'd never seen it that way. I did not claim you as captive, Two Ravens continued. I accepted chance to help, to be part of something good, to save life instead of taking it. You gave me gift that day, Rebecca. You gave me purpose. You gave me family again, even for short time. I am the one who should thank you. The tears came then, hard and fast. Lucy started crying too, feeding off her mother's emotion. Two Ravens reached out and touched Rebecca's face gently, wiping away tears with his thumb. You go to fort now. You tell them whatever story keeps you safe. Say you were lost. Say you were helped by friendly Indians. Say whatever you need to. You take care of Lucy. You live good life. You find happiness. He stepped back. But know this, you are not alone. Somewhere out there I am thinking of you both, praying for you both, loving you both. Rebecca couldn't find words big enough for what she was feeling, so she just did what felt right. She stepped forward and hugged him. Lucy pressed between them. Two Ravens went rigid with surprise, then slowly, carefully, put his arms around them both. They stood like that for a long moment, three people who'd become a family in the strangest way possible, holding each other on the Kansas prairie with a fort in the distance and an impossible future stretching out ahead. When they finally pulled apart, Two Ravens took something from around his neck. It was a small leather pouch on a cord. This has medicine herbs. For protection, for healing. You keep it. Keep Lucy safe. Rebecca took it with shaking hands and put it around her neck next to the beaded necklace he'd given her. Then she removed her own wedding ring from Daniel, the one she'd worn all this time. She pressed it into Two Ravens' hand. "This was my husband's ring," she said. "He was a good man. He would have liked you, I think. Would have been grateful you took care of his family when he couldn't." She closed his fingers around it. "Keep it. Remember us." Two Ravens looked at the simple gold band, then nodded and put it on the cord around his own neck, next to the medicine pouch he'd worn. "I will never forget," he said. "This I promise." He helped her onto the horse, made sure Lucy was secure in the carrier on Rebecca's back. Then he handed her the reins of the pack horse carrying her supplies. "Fort is straight ahead, 1 hour ride. Tell guards you got separated from wagon train. They will believe this. They will help you." He paused. "If war ends someday, if things change, you can always come find us. Summer grounds are in the valley with 3 hills shaped like sleeping buffalo. Anyone from the tribes will know it. You can find me there." "And if you want to find me?" Rebecca asked. "How will you know where I am?" Two Ravens smiled, actually smiled, sad but real. "I will know. Spirits that brought you to me will let me know if you need me. I trust this." There was nothing left to say. Rebecca turned the horse toward the fort. Lucy was still fussing, reaching back toward Two Ravens with her little hands. Rebecca didn't look back right away. She couldn't, but when she'd ridden about 50 yards, she couldn't help it. She turned in the saddle. Two Ravens was still standing there, absolutely still, watching them go. When he saw her look back, he raised one hand. Not quite a wave, just a gesture of acknowledgement, of farewell, of love. Rebecca raised her hand in return. Then she turned forward and rode toward the fort, toward the life waiting for her there, whatever that would be. The guards at Fort Larned were suspicious at first. A white woman alone with a baby, coming from the direction of Indian Territory, was unusual. But Rebecca told the story Two Ravens had suggested. Separated from her wagon train, husband dead, survived with help from friendly natives who'd pointed her toward the fort. They accepted it, mostly because they couldn't imagine any other explanation that made sense. A sergeant's wife took Rebecca in, gave her a real bed to sleep in, helped her clean up. The woman clucked her tongue over Rebecca's calloused hands and sun-darkened skin. "You poor dear," she said. "What you must have been through." Rebecca just nodded, not trusting herself to speak. If she started talking about what she'd actually been through, these people wouldn't understand. They'd think she'd been brainwashed or had gone crazy. They couldn't comprehend that she'd found family among savages, that she'd learned to love a man who wasn't her husband, that leaving that life behind felt like losing everything for a second time. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca made plans. She had the money Two Ravens had given her, plus she could sell some of the items from her wagon if the army had recovered it. She could get to St. Louis, maybe find work there, start over somehow. But every night she'd hold Lucy and tell her stories. Stories about a brave warrior named Two Ravens, about a kind old woman called Morning Bird, about a camp of people who'd taken them in when they had nothing. Lucy was too young to understand the words, but Rebecca told the stories anyway, so she wouldn't forget. So Lucy would grow up knowing where she'd come from, how much she'd been loved. Years passed. Rebecca did make it to St. Louis. She found work as a seamstress,